In 2004, Morgan Spurlock convinced millions that McDonald's could wreck your body in just a month. But 20 years later, his math doesn't add up. He never publicly released the detailed daily food log that would verify his 5,000 calories per day claim, and the science looks shakier than ever. Later experiments challenged his results, and his own admission about long-term alcohol use now raises questions about what really caused the health issues shown on screen. Today, we're looking back at the most famous fast food documentary in history to see how its claims compare with independent research and verifiable data. But first, it helps to understand why McDonald's was such an easy target at that exact cultural moment. How McDonald's became the perfect villain. In the years leading up to 2004, McDonald's had already cemented itself as a symbol of scale, convenience, and abundance. Part of that image came from its most aggressive promotion, the super size option. First introduced in the late 1980s and made permanent in the early 1990s, the upgrade allowed customers to swap their regular fries and soda for portions nearly double in size, all for just a small extra charge. What began as a limited marketing experiment soon became part of the chain's identity, reinforced through promotions tied to cultural landmarks. One of the most famous examples was the 1993 tie-in with Jurassic Park, which linked the thrill of a summer blockbuster to the thrill of walking away with the biggest soda and fries imaginable. Bigger is better wasn't just a slogan, it had become a kind of cultural shorthand, with supersized entering everyday conversation as a metaphor for American excess. By the early 2000s, this mindset collided with a national conversation about health. Newspapers ran constant stories about rising obesity rates, while talk shows debated whether corporations or consumers carried more responsibility. Nutritionists questioned whether portions that kept expanding created an environment where overeating seemed normal. Critics argued that toys in Happy Meals shaped children's lifelong eating habits, while sociologists worried that entire communities were replacing home-cooked meals with fast food. These arguments weren't always backed by airtight science, but they resonated emotionally. With its global branding and sheer visibility, McDonald's stood out as the most obvious scapegoat. Its golden arches came to represent not just a burger chain, but an entire style of eating, and an entire generation's anxieties about what that meant. That visibility made McDonald's an easy target for parody. Late-night shows joked about gallon-sized sodas, and news outlets loved placing portion sizes side by side to show just how oversized super size really was. Other fast food chains had been just as aggressive in upselling, but McDonald's received more attention because it was everywhere. Its ubiquity meant that critiques landed harder, and by 2004, the chain was already functioning as a cultural villain in the debate around food and health. Into this atmosphere, Morgan Spurlock's Super Size Me arrived. The documentary wasn't introducing a new controversy. It was dramatizing a fear that many people already shared. Watching a man eat 3 McDonald's meals a day while his health reportedly spiraled downward amplified what audiences were prepared to believe. That fast food, especially from the most recognizable restaurant in the world, was uniquely harmful. The broad irony is that consumption patterns didn't slow down after the film. Even with Super Size Me dominating headlines and classrooms, fast food remained deeply embedded in daily American life. Surveys show that over 115 million Americans still eat fast food every single day, a reminder that the documentary's central villain was never the only source of the problem. Still, McDonald's took the disproportionate brunt of the cultural blame. Spurlock's framing gave viewers the catharsis of seeing a global corporation punished, without requiring them to question the wider food environment that extended far beyond a single chain. This atmosphere of suspicion laid the foundation for Spurlock's claims to be taken at face value. The public didn't just scrutinize his experiment, they accepted it as further confirmation of what they already thought they knew. And that acceptance made his most dramatic claims seem less questionable than they should have been, especially when it came to how much he was actually eating each day. The 5,000 calorie problem. One of the most striking claims in * Super Size Me was Morgan Spurlock's insistence that he consumed roughly 5,000 calories every single day during his month-long McDonald's experiment. That number became central to the film's drama, fueling the idea that fast food could devastate a body in record time. But almost immediately, critics noticed that the math didn't seem to fit, and the lack of supporting evidence raised more questions than answer. Unlike a scientific study where food logs are recorded and shared, Spurlock never released detailed records of what he actually ate. Without those logs, the 5,000-calorie figure remained unverified, and replication attempts consistently produced lower numbers. To understand why this claim drew so much scrutiny, it helps to look at what McDonald's actually offered in 2004. A typical meal, a cheeseburger, medium fries, and a medium soda, sat at about 1,000 calories. Even if you upgraded to a Big Mac with supersized fries and a large Coke, the number landed closer to 1,500 to 1,700 calories. That's significant, but it still meant that someone aiming for Spurlock's figure would need to eat those oversized combos 3 times a day, often with desserts or additional drinks on top, to get anywhere close to 5,000. Occasional days may have reached that level, but consistently hitting it across 30 days would require a deliberate effort to stack portions in ways most customers never did. In other words, it wasn't an automatic outcome of simply accepting the supersize option. It would have required intentional excess. Nutritionists who reviewed available menus attempted to reconstruct daily eating patterns. If breakfast had been 2 Egg McMuffins with hash browns and orange juice, that was about 900 calories. Lunch built around a Quarter Pounder with cheese, large fries, and a Coke totaled roughly 1,400. Add in a sundae and you reach about 1,700. Dinner anchored by something like a double Quarter Pounder with cheese, fries, and a shake came close to 1,800. Together, that day edges just below 4,000 calories. That's unquestionably unhealthy when repeated day after day, but it falls well short of the 5,000 figure that dominates the film's narration. It is true that higher totals were possible. Pairing the largest burgers with supersized fries and oversized sodas repeatedly could push totals upward. But even then, the numbers only cracked 5,000 when every single meal represented the absolute heaviest combination available, supplemented with desserts or extra entrees. Viewers noticed that the film often showed him eating filet-o-fish sandwiches, smaller shakes, or salads, meals that would lower those totals. This inconsistency made critics suspect that the headline number was less a measured average than a chosen figure meant to emphasize excess. The credibility gap widened because Spurlock declined to show his food diary. He admitted keeping a written record during the filming process, but chose never to release it publicly. From a scientific or journalistic standpoint, this omission is glaring. If the diary had confirmed his claim, making it available would have been the easiest way to end the debate. Instead, withholding it left only his narration, and that forced audiences to take him at his word. For skeptics, the refusal suggested the diary would have revealed numbers less extreme than advertised, thereby weakening the dramatic story presented on screen. In the years after the film's release, others tried to repeat the experiment. Perhaps the most known was a Swedish university trial, often referred to as the Linköping study, where participants ate fast food daily for a month under medical supervision. The outcomes did show weight gain and higher cholesterol, but they did not replicate the severe spikes in liver values and mood collapse that Super Size Me asterisk portrayed. Participants averaged between 3,300 and 4,200 calories per day, not the supposedly unstoppable 5,000. Similarly, critics like filmmaker Tom Naughton attempted their own McDonald's-only diets while carefully tracking calories. His project, eventually presented in Fat Head asterisk, also landed far below 5,000 calories a day, and his health markers did not crash in the way Spurlock claimed. These replications shared an important pattern. When calories were tracked transparently, results looked less catastrophic and more consistent with expected overeating rather than proof that McDonald's food carried a unique, toxic effect. This raises an important point for viewers. When Spurlock said 5,000 calories, it sounded like he was casually reflecting his everyday diet for the month. But in practice, sustaining that figure would have required near-constant supersizing, strategic dessert orders, and possibly extra meals not shown on screen. Without visible proof, we cannot know if that is what actually occurred. And if he was eating off-camera or exaggerating totals, Then the experiment shifted from being an open demonstration into a staged performance, designed to shock rather than document. One way to make the issue more concrete is to visualize it. Imagine sitting with a single supersized Big Mac meal, burger, fries, and soda. That sits between 1,500 and 1,700 calories. It's a large, filling order. Now compare that to a hypothetical 5,000 calorie day. That would require 3 of those meals, plus extras like sundaes, shakes, or even second burgers. Stacked together, it looks less like what a normal customer might choose and more like a filming stunt designed to guarantee a health collapse. If this script is being cut for video, it's the perfect place for a quick visual comparison, showing a single large meal contrasted with a full day's worth of food needed to reach 5,000. Viewers can immediately see how strained that claim really is. The absence of a food log remains the crux of the problem. If the diary had proven the claim, it would have strengthened the film's credibility. By withholding it, Spurlock insulated himself from verification while simultaneously capitalizing on the most sensational version of the story. In science, this kind of gap would invalidate the results. In entertainment, it could pass as dramatic framing, but audiences were encouraged to see Super Size Me asterisk as a serious statement about health. That contradiction is part of the reason critics continue to revisit the calorie claim decades later. Spurlock's story was never just about his meals. It was about building the impression of a body unraveling under predictable daily fast food intake. But if that intake was inflated or selectively presented, then the unraveling loses its explanatory power. The difference between 3,800 and 5,000 calories per day is not just a margin of error. It's the difference between presenting a realistic case of overeating and staging a theatrical collapse. That distinction matters when viewers interpret his health outcomes as warnings about what could happen to them. And those health outcomes were part of what truly unsettled audiences. Between weigh-ins and frequent medical visits, the film showed doctors appearing shocked by his results. His supposed calorie intake made those scenes feel inevitable, almost like watching an experiment reach a preset breaking point. Whether his daily numbers were inflated or not, the medical checkups became the moments that convinced viewers the situation was dire. Those segments carried more weight than any single meal shown on screen, and they are where the film's credibility gets tested next. Editing the doctors. When audiences remember asterisk super, size me asterisk, the images that often stand out the most aren't of Morgan Spurlock eating yet another hamburger. They're of doctors looking alarmed during his checkups. Each appointment in the film seemed more urgent than the last. Nurses were shown exchanging worried looks, and physicians appeared to voice escalating concern, leaving viewers with the impression that his health was deteriorating at an extraordinary pace. The editing leaned hard into this tension with quick cuts and ominous music, amplifying the most unsettling moments while downplaying more neutral observations. The takeaway was unmistakable. Medical professionals were not just monitoring his diet, they were witnessing a health breakdown in real time. But stripped of dramatic presentation, medical evaluations rarely sound like the scenes shown in the movie. Physicians typically walk patients through numbers and possible causes, often pointing out which results call for monitoring rather than immediate panic. The film condensed those explanations into fragments that sounded more extreme than they likely were. A simple "your cholesterol is up, let's keep an eye on this" can shift tone completely when isolated, placed against dark background music, and cut together with Spurlock's visibly depressed reactions. What the audience experienced was less a full medical consultation and more a highlight reel designed to keep the sense of crisis rising from scene to scene. The most memorable of these moments came in the discussion about Spurlock's liver. In the documentary, his doctor is shown comparing his results to what you might expect from someone who abuses alcohol. The implication was clear. Just 30 days of fast food had caused damage that resembled the effects of long-term drinking. This comparison became one of the central talking points of the entire film, so much so that it still circulates in conversations about the dangers of fast food nearly 2 decades later. Yet medical professionals who commented on the documentary noted how unlikely it would be for a single month of dietary excess, no matter how unhealthy, to bring about such severe changes. Liver enzyme levels can fluctuate, but the rate of change Spurlock displayed was far faster and far more dramatic than what is normally observed from diet alone. One doctor quoted after the film's release described the idea as extreme for the timescale, underlining that while food can certainly create risks over time, this kind of rapid damage would need a different explanation. That explanation may have come years later, when Spurlock openly admitted to decades of heavy drinking. His admission made alcohol plausible, and, in the eyes of many medical experts, the most likely factor behind the abnormalities the film attributed entirely to fast food. While the movie carefully framed his issues as evidence against McDonald's, understanding his hidden habits offers a context the audience never received. Instead of proving that hamburgers had reshaped his liver in weeks, the test results might have been showing patterns consistent with someone who had been drinking heavily for years. This doesn't mean diet played no role at all. Overeating does stress the liver, but it does mean the certainty presented in the film was not supported by the underlying medical science. The editing's role in this cannot be understated. By amplifying the alarm in doctors' voices and omitting caveats or alternative explanations, the filmmakers eliminated nuance in favor of spectacle. Even though liver abnormalities can arise from multiple factors, viral infections, dehydration, and particularly alcohol, the on-screen narrative offered only one cause: McDonald's meals. Viewers trusted the authority of the physicians because they were real people in real appointments. But without hearing the sessions in full, they could not know which parts had been left on the cutting room floor. The resulting impression that medically trained professionals were stunned at food alone destroying his body fit perfectly into the film's argument, but was far from a complete picture of the situation. Other elements of his checkups followed the same selective pattern. Increases in cholesterol and weight were presented as shocking, when in reality both were predictable results of sustained overeating. The dramatic tone implied he was experiencing a biological collapse, when in fact many clinicians remarked that the shifts, while unhealthy, were consistent with consuming more calories than the body needed. Without broader context, viewers conflated ordinary risk markers with catastrophic illness. Again, what was lost was moderation. Doctors often frame test results with advice on next steps, whether that's monitoring levels, improving diet, or retesting to see if a spike is temporary. The film chose the moments that sounded like warnings and edited them as if doctors were announcing emergencies. The effect of using selective edits was not just storytelling, it reshaped how the public interpreted the experiment. For students shown the movie in health classes, or for general audiences who had never reviewed lab work before, it gave the impression that fast food was uniquely capable of destroying a body almost overnight. From a media standpoint, that perspective was compelling. From a scientific standpoint, it was misleading. Even the most critical physicians reviewing the film agreed that overeating fast food was harmful, but they questioned the framing that implied unparalleled danger. When coupled with Spurlock's later revelations about his drinking, the suspicion grew that the film had used editing to conflate different causes under one dramatic label. In hindsight, this choice may explain why Super Size Me feels persuasive in the moment but fragile under scrutiny. Hearing a doctor mention liver damage like an alcoholic, while Spurlock insists he wasn't drinking, created a powerful narrative that grabbed headlines. But once the drinking became public knowledge, it reframed those medical scenes dramatically. What once looked like undeniable proof of fast food's dangers began to look more like storytelling that had left out relevant information. And when critics pointed this out, it changed how seriously the results could be taken as evidence. This is why the portrayal of doctors matters so much to any evaluation of the film. They were the anchors meant to ground the stunts in objective reality. By editing their responses selectively, Spurlock gave audiences what looked like medical certainty, when in reality the data was more ambiguous than the documentary admitted. And because he withheld information that would have helped explain those results, his alcohol use, the audience was left without the context needed to interpret what they were seeing. The broader implication is simple but important. Dramatic editing can make reasonable medical conversations appear catastrophic, and hidden lifestyle context can make ordinary test results look extraordinary. In Super Size Me asterisk, those two dynamics work together to heighten a story that felt definitive when it played in theaters, but reads far differently with hindsight. The cautionary tale that captured headlines in 2004 now looks less like a clear warning about McDonald's and more like a case study in how selective framing can dominate perception. And that brings us to a logical question. If fast food really could create this level of health collapse in a matter of weeks, surely others trying the same experiment would show the same catastrophic results. Yet, when researchers and independent critics repeated his 30-day plan, their bodies didn't respond in nearly the same way. That discrepancy became one of the strongest challenges to the credibility of Spurlock's story. Replication attempts that didn't stack up. If the health effects Spurlock portrayed truly reflected what anyone would face after a month of fast food, then others repeating that experiment should have reached the same outcomes. The idea was simple: 30 days, 3 meals, no outside food, and acceptance of larger portions when offered. Yet when people tried it in the years that followed, their experiences didn't align with the crisis depicted in the film. Some gained a few pounds, most reported feeling sluggish, but the catastrophic bloodwork and dramatic health breakdowns Spurlock presented were never duplicated. What emerged instead was a patchwork of outcomes, none approaching the severity that made Super Size Me such a sensation. One of the most important replications came from researchers in Sweden at Linköping University. In 2006, they enrolled 7 healthy medical students who agreed to eat exclusively fast food for 4 weeks. To mirror Spurlock's sedentary lifestyle, they were even provided free bus passes to discourage any extra exercise. Throughout the study, participants checked in with doctors, logged their meals, and had blood drawn to track markers like cholesterol and liver enzyme. The results were far less dramatic than Spurlock's narrative. Yes, the students gained weight, on average about 6 to 12 pounds, and several reported feeling more tired than usual. But their cholesterol rose only modestly, and none suffered the kind of severe liver issues that had been portrayed in the film. The Swedish team noted that there were changes worth monitoring, but they were the kinds of changes expected when healthy young adults suddenly overeat processed foods, not signs of imminent organ damage. For critics of Spurlock's claims, the Swedish study stood out as the clearest scientific signal that his body's reaction was not typical. The contrast between Spurlock's claim of near liver failure and the Swedish group's mild abnormalities raised a lingering question. Why did his health spiral so much faster? Some researchers speculated that his pre-experiment diet may have shaped his response. At the time, Spurlock described himself as living with his vegan girlfriend and keeping a relatively clean diet before switching cold turkey into fast food excess. That shift from plant-based to heavy, greasy, high-calorie foods could have compounded the shock his body experienced. Baseline health plays a measurable role in how people react to dietary stress. Starting from one extreme and swinging to another makes an outcome less representative of what might happen to the average person making similar changes. Outside academic settings, less formal replications also challenged the film's credibility. In 2009, comedian and former health writer Tom Naughton released the documentary Fat Head as a direct rebuttal. Naughton ate nothing but fast food for a month, carefully tracking his portions and caloric intake. His approach was not eat everything in sight, but rather prove you can manage nutrition even from a fast food counter. The results completely diverged from Spurlock's. Naughton lost weight, reduced his body fat, and saw slight improvements in cholesterol. His experiment demonstrated a basic but crucial point: calories matter more than the restaurant logo on the bag. Without letting portions spiral upward, eating from fast food menus did not automatically trigger collapse. Another example came from John Cisna, an Iowa science teacher who gained media attention in 2014 for his own 30-day McDonald's-only diet. With the help of his students, Cisna designed his meals to stay near 2,000 calories per day, modeling the government's nutritional guidelines. He exercised moderately and tracked his health throughout. At the end, Cisna reported losing about 37 pounds over several months, with lowered cholesterol and improved blood pressure. Though critics pointed out that he deliberately controlled portions in ways Spurlock did not, his experiment underscored how dramatically outcome depends on calorie balance rather than brand-specific toxicity. Cisna's story entered the public conversation less as a definitive counterpoint than as an example of how nutrition choices within the same restaurant chain could produce opposite results. Taken together, these cases illustrate a broader truth. Replication attempts failed to reproduce the dramatic collapse shown on film. They didn't prove fast food was healthy, but they did show that a month of exclusive McDonald's eating did not automatically push people into depression, extreme cholesterol spikes, or liver damage. The weight gain and fatigue participants reported fit the expected pattern of overconsumption, but the more frightening results Spurlock emphasized, shakes, mood crashes, and organ stress, remained unique to his account. That gap made clear that something about his personal context, not the McDonald's menu alone, likely drove the story. Even so, audiences should be cautious not to swing to another extreme. These replications don't suggest that a fast food diet is harmless. Overeating fries and burgers day after day still increases risks for weight gain, high sodium exposure, and long-term metabolic issues. What they highlight is that Spurlock exaggerated the short-term consequences for dramatic effect. Instead of 30 days proving catastrophic by default, what the evidence shows is a range of reactions. Mild strain for some, modest improvements for others under calorie control, and nothing consistently resembling medical collapse. It's also essential to understand how personal history shapes reaction to diet changes. Someone with a background of lower calorie intake or specific health conditions might experience sharper effects from overeating in a sudden shift. That perspective aligns with speculation that Spurlock's baseline diet made his switch to McDonald's uniquely difficult for his body. Variability isn't just possible, it's expected when personal histories differ. Controlled conditions help smooth out these factors, but Spurlock's experiment was never controlled. It was billed as entertainment and presented with selective editing that amplified the most shocking outcomes. The replication attempts also exposed another issue: transparency. The Swedish experiment published menus and blood data. Naughton and Sisner recorded calorie totals and kept open documentation. By contrast, Spurlock declined to release his own food log. Without logs, researchers couldn't replay his choices meal for meal, and that made verification impossible. In a sense, Spurlock's story stood alone because it was left unverifiable. Replication made it clear. Outcomes vary when conditions vary, but there was no honest method to demonstrate that his precise descent could be repeated. So what we are left with is a pattern. Fast food-only diets tested under different strategies consistently produced logical results tied to portion size and energy balance. Weight gain if calories increased, weight stability or loss if calories were controlled. What they did not produce, despite repeated trials, was the kind of acute organ damage and psychological crash that dominated the film's narrative. And that inconsistency shifts attention away from the restaurants themselves and toward the individual factors that could make one person react far more intensely than others. Which brings us back to Spurlock's personal health. If independent studies with documented menus and blood work found only mild disturbances, then his own liver alarm and mood swings suggest outside variables that never appeared on-screen. Looking more closely at those missing details provides a different lens on what might really have been happening during those 30 days. And it is in that missing context that the most significant challenge to the story emerges. The missing context of alcohol, one of the most crucial details shaping how audiences interpreted Super Size Me, was Morgan Spurlock's insistence that alcohol was not part of his 30-day project. On camera, he told his doctors that he didn't drink, presenting himself as a healthy baseline subject whose only upcoming change would be a diet made entirely of McDonald's meals. This mattered for the experiment's framing because it implied that every health change captured on film, from rising cholesterol to mood crashes, could only be tied to fast food. By eliminating alcohol, smoking, or underlying conditions from the picture, Spurlock narrowed the story to a single cause and effect relationship: McDonald's food as the sole driver of his decline. That narrative collapsed years later. In December 2017, Spurlock published a public confession in which he admitted to decades of sustained alcohol abuse. His words were unambiguous. He had been consistently drinking since the age of 13, and in his own account, he hadn't been sober for more than a week in 30 years. For audiences who remembered his claim of being alcohol-free during Super Size Me this revelation changed the context entirely. It did not only contradict the way he had presented himself to doctors on screen, it also introduced a major variable that could explain many of the very health issues highlighted in the documentary. Alcohol's role in liver health is well documented. Heavy, long-term drinking is one of the most common causes of elevated liver enzymes, fatty liver disease, and inflammation. These changes do not develop in a few weeks of fast food consumption. They accumulate across years of consistent alcohol use. From that perspective, the film's claim that 30 days of burgers and fries pushed Spurlock's liver into dangerous territory now looks incomplete. His blood test numbers may have reflected damage already developing over decades of drinking. When the documentary isolated McDonald as the only possible culprit, it ignored a far more established medical explanation. This context also reshapes how viewers interpret one of the film's most unsettling moments, when a doctor tells Spurlock that his liver test results look like those of a person struggling with alcoholism. At the time, this comment was framed as evidence of just how toxic supersized meals could be. But with Spurlock's later admission, the explanation appears much simpler. The resemblance existed because alcohol had in fact been a constant part of his life. Instead of proving that 30 days of Big Macs could mimic years of alcohol damage, what those numbers may really show is fast food layered on top of an already compromised system. The symptoms Spurlock experienced throughout the film take on a new light as well. His shakes, mood swings, night sweats, and agitation were shown as the inevitable effects of deep-frying his body in fast food. Yet many of those same symptoms are also associated with alcohol withdrawal. Medical literature explains that when someone with long-term dependence suddenly reduces or cuts intake, the body reacts with tremors, anxiety, irritability, and fatigue. In severe cases, withdrawal even becomes life-threatening. Even if Spurlock did not fully abstain, changes in his drinking pattern during filming could have created withdrawal-like effects. Seen in this light, the sequences showcasing his low mood and jittery behavior might not have been unique food-driven consequences at all, but signs of an unacknowledged, underlying dependency. Audiences believed the story in 2004 because it reinforced cultural anxieties about fast food. When he appeared to unravel physically and emotionally in the span of 30 days, it confirmed worries about portion sizes, obesity, and processed diets. But once Spurlock acknowledged alcoholism, the simplicity of that story fell apart. What viewers had accepted as proof that McDonald's could dismantle a healthy body in weeks was, at best, an incomplete picture. His decline may have stemmed not only from diet, but also from subtracting or altering a substance he had relied on nearly every day for 3 decades. The omission matters because it transformed how the film was received. As presented, Super Size Me looked like a clean demonstration, one healthy man, one dramatic change, one undeniable outcome. In reality, the baseline Spurlock claimed for himself never existed. His decades of alcohol use made him an atypical subject long before the experiment began. By withholding that background, he ensured that the movie's health scares would be interpreted as fast food's fault, rather than as the predictable vulnerabilities of someone with chronic risk factors already in place. This inconsistency also explains why replication attempts failed to reproduce his collapse. When Swedish researchers ran a controlled fast food diet and saw mild weight gain but not severe liver damage, it wasn't because their experiment was flawed. It was because their participants did not have the same hidden context Spurlock carried into his own trial. When critics like Tom Naughton tracked their calories and maintained stable health, the difference may again come down to pre-existing conditions that Spurlock never disclosed. Without transparency about alcohol, his case could never be fairly compared to theirs. Health professionals looking back on the movie after Spurlock's admission were unsurprised. Many had voiced suspicions years earlier that his liver enzyme spikes seemed unusually rapid. Medical norms suggest that diet changes alone, even very aggressive ones, rarely create such dramatic shifts in just weeks. With alcohol placed back into the picture, those anomalies make far more sense. The damage does not need to be explained entirely by food when heavy drinking already provides a well-established pathway. Likewise, withdrawal provides a ready-made interpretation for tremors and mood swings. These are not speculative leaps. They are well-known patterns in medicine that offer a clearer context than fast food on its own ever could. That clarification also makes the editing choices of Super Size Me more glaring. The film amplified every symptom as if it were a revelation about McDonald's, omitting any consideration of alternate causes. But alternate causes were present all along. By removing alcohol from the narrative, Spurlock made the results seem shocking. With alcohol reinserted, the same footage looks less like groundbreaking proof of food dangers and more like a misattributed set of symptoms shaped by long-term dependency. The admission in 2017 did more than undercut the documentary's credibility. It reshaped its meaning. Instead of documenting the unique dangers of fast food, Super Size Me stands today as a case study in the risks of omission. By presenting incomplete information, it created a chain of conclusions that millions accepted as truth. The story functioned as entertainment, but its foundation had less to do with science and more to do with carefully curated presentation. In short, the absence of alcohol in his narrative created an illusion of certainty that misled viewers about what his health results could actually prove. The reinterpretation does not excuse the risks of overconsumption. Calories, fats, and sodium in fast food can steadily harm long-term health, and no outside factor erases that reality. But when cause and effect was attributed entirely to McDonald's in 2004, the omission of Spurlock's alcohol history skewed perception. What viewers assumed was a controlled dietary experiment now looks like an uncontrolled mix of variables: food excess, heavy drinking, and possible withdrawal, edited together into a single exaggerated storyline. When audiences revisit Super Size Me * today with this knowledge, the transformation is striking. The same footage that once seemed to demonstrate the perils of supersized sodas now reads as a portrait of a filmmaker omitting core truths about himself. The cautionary tale holds, but it's a caution about methodology and honesty as much as about eating habits. Instead of standing as definitive proof that Big Macs can collapse a body in 30 days, it illustrates how selective context can turn personal struggles into a cultural narrative. This missing context about alcohol not only shifted how critics saw the film, but also complicated how McDonald's found itself framed in the aftermath. Viewers blamed the chain for a medical outcome that may not have been solely its doing, yet the company still faced the cultural fallout as though it were. How McDonald's chose to respond to that moment became a story of its own, one that revealed how corporations manage perception when a documentary threatens their brand. McDonald's response: spin or strategy? When Super Size Me * cast McDonald's as the symbol of unhealthy eating, the company faced more than a short-lived PR nuisance. It faced a global story that stuck. Newspapers, television commentators, and classroom teachers used the film as proof that the fast food giant was contributing to an obesity crisis. Rather than remain silent, McDonald's mounted a direct response, one designed not only to push back against Spurlock's claims, but also to present itself as responsible and pragmatic in the face of criticism. The company's actions in 2004 revealed a strategy built around two central moves: public advertising that reframed the debate and a high-profile decision about its own menu. The first move played out in print. McDonald's purchased full-page space in major British newspapers and used the ads to acknowledge parts of Spurlock's message while challenging the rest. The wording was notable for its deliberate tone. What may surprise you is how much of the film we agree with. By agreeing with broad points about overeating and lack of exercise being unhealthy, McDonald's positioned itself as reasonable. But the ads went further, criticizing the film for portraying behavior that no ordinary customer would replicate. To put that into perspective, the company calculated that Spurlock ate in 30 days the equivalent of what it would take a typical McDonald's patron years to consume. In other words, McDonald's accepted the obvious science that excessive calories cause problems, while framing Spurlock's routine as a stunt, not a fair test of real-world eating. This blend of concession and critique helped the company appear transparent without conceding its reputation entirely. The second, more visible move was a menu change. In March 2004, McDonald's announced the removal of the supersize option for drinks and fries. Officially, the company attributed the decision to menu simplification. That explanation suggested an effort to streamline operations rather than a reaction to negative publicity. But because the change came so soon after Super Size Me made oversized portions infamous, it was hard for observers not to interpret it as a response to the film's spotlight on excess. For reporters, the timing offered a tangible sign that the documentary had influence, even if McDonald's refused to admit it directly. The chain rid itself of its most criticized product but claimed it was simply housekeeping. The simplification story, however, was harder to sustain as years went on. McDonald's menu didn't shrink, it grew. In 2007, the company offered about 60 core items in the United States. By 2013, that number had swelled to roughly 145, including new sandwiches, beverages, and seasonal products. Business Insider and other outlets highlighted this expansion as evidence that simplification was not the motive for removing supersized meal. If the true goal had been to pare down, the menu should have gotten leaner. Instead, it nearly doubled within a few years. The contrast between a public claim of simplification and a documented expansion suggested that the retirement of supersizing addressed an image problem more than an operational necessity. It was a symbolic adjustment that reassured critics without restructuring the business. Both of these moves, the newspaper ads and the menu change, show how McDonald's engaged in what could be seen as strategic balancing. On one hand, it acknowledged parents' and health officials' concerns by eliminating its most controversial promotion. On the other, it firmly rejected the idea that Spurlock's experience represented its customers or its food. The ad stressed moderation and personal responsibility, while the menu action showed responsiveness to portion-size debate. This approach allowed McDonald's to look engaged with the conversation while still protecting itself from the harsher conclusions the film had put forward. The strategy was not entirely defensive. McDonald's rolled out programs and promotions that emphasized variety, including initiatives aimed at giving customers choices. By promoting new salads, fruit options, and grilled items, the company underscored the idea that it was not forcing anyone to overeat. Nutrition, it implied, was about individual decision-making. If someone followed Spurlock's extreme example of eating large quantities 3 times a day, that was a personal choice, not the company's design. From a PR standpoint, this placed responsibility back onto consumers while letting McDonald's point to healthier alternatives as proof of its awareness. In practice, the ads and the supersize removal worked better together than either one alone. The printed message reminded consumers that Spurlock's eating binge was unusual, while the menu change offered a visual, concrete response people could see at the order counter. Both steps helped shift media coverage from whether McDonald's had been exposed to how it was adapting. For a brand uneasy about admitting fault, that was an effective pivot. The message became less about past practices and more about present flexibility, a theme that supported its image as a company that could evolve alongside its customers. It is also important to recognize how calculated the choices were. Removing supersize affected portion perception, but not the profitability of meals. Customers could still order multiple items, adding calories beyond any retired option. Likewise, the salads and fruit bowls were prominently advertised, but became low-volume sellers in most U.S. markets. What they provided was not a revenue overhaul, but good optics. They gave the company a way to answer critics by pointing to diversification, even if burgers and fries continued to drive sales. From a communications standpoint, this approach gave McDonald's credibility on both sides of the debate. To advocates for change, the brand could point to measurable steps it had taken to eliminate extremes and promote balance. To loyal customers, it could insist that the core menu remained unchanged, promising the same staple items that kept people returning. The company skillfully avoided alienating either group. Instead of appearing to cave under pressure, McDonald's looked like a business managing its reputation responsibly in an environment of heightened scrutiny. If anything, the company's dual strategy demonstrated how large brands can absorb cultural criticism without dismantling their model. During the months after the documentary, demand for its food remained steady, its stores stayed crowded, and its profits continued. By the time the film's impact faded from headlines, McDonald's had weathered the storm with only one major menu concession, and with little evidence that its long-term success had been threatened. For a corporation of its size, shifting the narrative was more about resilience than retreat. But the larger story wasn't just about public relations. It was also about what customers actually saw and ordered in the stores. The ad set one tone, and the supersize removal made headlines, but the long-term evolution of the menu itself pointed to a more complicated reality. The company experimented with balance and healthy branding, but consumer choices revealed something different once those options arrived. The evolution of the menu. In the aftermath of Asterisk Super, Size Me Asterisk, McDonald's attempted to reshape its image through what it called the Real Life Choices menu. Rolled out in 2004, the program was designed to show that the brand was responding to a wave of criticism about health and portion sizes. For the first time, calorie-conscious diners could find items that broke from the chain's reputation for indulgent. A grilled chicken sandwich offered a leaner alternative to fried options, fruit and yogurt parfaits appeared next to fries, and salads were packaged as balanced sides. The message to customers was clear. No matter what your lifestyle looked like, there was now a way to make it work within the golden arches. For a company facing questions about its role in rising obesity, the timing was not subtle. These new offerings were marketed as proof that McDonald's could evolve without abandoning its core menu. The rollout, however, quickly revealed the limits of supply meeting supposed demand. Healthier options looked good on posters and in commercials, but inside restaurants, they rarely left the tray line in strong numbers. Salads, often cited as the flagship of the healthier push, became side players that many locations eventually dropped due to low sales. Yogurt parfaits and snack wraps appeared in national campaigns but could not sustain popularity long-term. Customers knew lighter choices were available, but in practice, they ordered the same burgers, fries, and shakes that had defined the menu for decades. These new items functioned more as a public statement than as a core driver of revenue. The company could say it listened, but what people carried to their tables told a different story. By the early 2010s, the inconsistency between image and reality had grown more visible. While McDonald's had eliminated its most notorious promotion, the supersize option, the overall menu ballooned in size. From its simple 9-item offering in 1948, the U.S. menu peaked at around 145 selections by 2013. Breakfast sandwiches, blended drinks, fruit smoothies, espresso products, international-style burgers, and limited-time specials filled the board. Far from simplifying choices, the company made them more complex. The removal of supersizing was symbolic. The actual dining experience overflowed with new indulgences. Customers could not order towering fries anymore, but they could walk away with milkshake-like frappes or oversized chicken sandwiches. This evolution was less about trimming unhealthy extremes and more about diversifying indulgence to maintain interest. Public health advocates had hoped that the transparency movement would amplify the effect of menu reforms. By the late 2000s and early 2010s, calorie labeling laws required fast food restaurants to display nutrition information on menus. Paired with digital ordering boards, McDonald's was no longer defined solely by photographs of golden fries or glossy cheeseburgers. Every item now carried a calorie count in bold numbers beside it. Whether you ordered in New York or Los Angeles, a large soda now came with a visible reminder of its 300-plus calories right next to the price. For health officials, this was progress. Customers would no longer be able to ignore the numbers. They would have to confront energy values as they chose their meals. But research showed the gap between awareness and action. Studies tracking consumer behavior found that calorie labeling had only modest effects. Some customers did change individual choices, skipping a dessert here or downsizing a drink there, but the overall pattern of ordering remained stable. McDonald's patrons still reached mainly for the staples: Big Macs, fries, chicken McNuggets, and combos with soda. Researchers noted that fast food often operated in the space of indulgence, where cravings overshadowed rational accounting. The presence of calorie counts might inform, but it rarely transformed. For McDonald's, this was in some ways an ideal outcome. It could claim transparency, respond to regulators, and show innovation through digital menus, all while maintaining sales of its best-performing items. The numbers on the board mattered to public relations more than they mattered to purchasing behavior. The bigger question was whether these reforms, added items, and transparency rules translated into meaningful changes in eating patterns at the population level. Data from the National Center for Health Statistics suggested not. Between August 2021 and August 2023, about 32% of American adults reported eating fast food on any given day. Across those years, fast food continued to contribute, on average, 11.7% of daily caloric intake among adults. While that share had declined slightly from 14% in 2013-2014, the overall significance of fast food in the American diet remained difficult to ignore. In other words, almost 1/3 of US adults were still eating fast food daily, and more than 1 in 10 calories in the typical American diet came from it, despite over a decade of menu diversification and calorie transparency measured. Generational and demographic distinctions further underline the persistence of these habits. Younger adults between the ages of 20 and 39 consumed the greatest share of fast food calories, about 15% of their daily diets, compared to just under 12% for middle-aged adults and less than 8% for those over 60. In short, younger generations were carrying fast food eating patterns forward, ensuring the trend's continuation even after decades of criticism. At the same time, obesity rates correlated closely with fast food reliance. Adults classified as obese derived about 13.7% of their calories from fast food, compared to about 10.8% for those who were overweight and just under 10% for people at normal weight. These statistics highlighted that the most frequent fast food customers were also among the population's most vulnerable to long-term health consequences. Taken together, the history of the Real Life Choices initiative, the rise in menu complexity, and the addition of calorie information pointed to the same outcome. Perception had shifted more than reality. McDonald's could point to grilled burgers, salads, fruit sides, and transparency as proof of social responsibility. Regulators and health advocates could declare increased awareness, yet consumer behavior changed little. Fries, cheeseburgers, and sodas still dominated receipt. Nutritional data on the screens might slow some diners, but it did not remake the experience. For all the talk of balance, the Golden Arches fed America in much the same way as it had before Spurlock's film played in theaters. The menu's evolution over 2 decades therefore highlights a paradox. McDonald's became a brand that looked healthier, sounded healthier, and advertised healthier intentions, but its primary role in American diets barely shifted. People valued choice without embracing change. For its part, the company balanced reform and indulgence effectively, maintaining growth while absorbing decades of criticism. From the outside, it might look like reform. From the inside, it felt like continuity. And this continuity forces a larger question. If transparency, healthier offerings, and decades of public debate barely shifted patterns of fast food consumption, then the weight of America's health crisis must be larger than a single menu board or even a single chain. The bigger picture: obesity in 2025. By 2025, the conversation about obesity has moved far beyond the cultural skirmishes sparked by a single documentary. What once looked like a debate about portion sizes or one company's responsibility has now hardened into a measurable global crisis, backed by decades of data. The World Health Organization reported in 2022 that around 2.5 billion adults were overweight, with nearly 890 million of them living with obesity. That meant 43% of all adults worldwide carried excess weight, and 16% already met the medical definition of obesity. The trend has only kept climbing. According to the World Obesity Federation's 2025 Atlas, the number of adults living with obesity is projected to reach 1.13 billion by 2030, more than doubling since 2010. Even more significant, cases of severe obesity, defined as a body mass index over 35, are set to more than double in this time frame, creating pressures that ripple through every part of healthcare. These aren't figures tied to one place or one habit. They show a pattern cutting across regions, with middle and low-income countries now seeing some of the steepest increases as diet and lifestyle changes collide with limited healthcare readiness. The health burden tied to these trends is enormous. In 2021, high body mass index was directly linked to an estimated 1.6 million premature deaths from non-communicable diseases like diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. That exceeded the 1.2 million lives lost globally in road traffic accidents during the same year. The costs are not only counted in mortality, but also in years lived with avoidable ill health. Data from the World Obesity Atlas shows that more than a quarter, 27%, of adult years spent managing chronic disease stemmed directly from weight-related risks. In type 2 diabetes cases, that figure more than doubled. Over half of all adult years lived with illness were linked to high BMI. Beyond medical statistics, this represents reduced quality of life, higher healthcare costs, and a growing strain on systems around the world, especially in places where public health responses remain weak. In the United States, the problem is especially pronounced. A 2024 study in The Lancet found that nearly 3 out of 4 American adults were overweight or obese, a sharp increase from the early 1990s, when just over half met those thresholds. The National Center for Health Statistics reported that between August 2021 and August 2023, 40.3% of U.S. adults met the clinical definition of obesity. This figure captures the scope of the issue in clear, unambiguous terms. Obesity in the U.S. is no longer an anomaly but a prevailing norm. While there are differences across geography and community type, urban obesity rates have shown slight declines while rural areas have seen increases. The system-wide scale is undeniable. Obesity has become a defining health challenge for the majority of the adult population, cutting across demographics and socioeconomic categories. What stands out about these American numbers is that they demonstrate the limits of focusing on one company or even one type of restaurant. Spurlock's framing in 2004 made McDonald's the visual symbol of unhealthy eating, but by 2025, reality looks far more complicated. Sedentary jobs have replaced physically demanding ones for much of the workforce. Daily reliance on cars has squeezed out physical activity, and calorie-dense, ultra-processed foods are available in every supermarket aisle. Research shows that sugar-sweetened beverages contribute massive amounts of invisible calories to everyday diets, and alcohol, a factor Spurlock downplayed in his own life, remains another major source of empty energy intake. Grocery store products, from frozen entrees to snack foods, account for large numbers of calories consumed outside any fast food counter. The broader food environment produces the same risks highlighted in *super size me*, but spreads them evenly across household kitchens, gas stations, and convenience stores alike. The unequal effect across communities reveals another layer. While national averages are high, breakdowns by location and age group show added vulnerabilities. The U.S. Department of Agriculture reported that between March 2023 and March 2024, obesity rates in rural areas actually rose by 0.5 percentage point, while rates in urban areas dropped slightly. These differences suggest that access to health care, options for exercise, and even the availability of fresh food play a crucial role in determining outcomes. Rural environments often combine limited medical access with food deserts and higher poverty, creating conditions in which the obesity burden rises disproportionately. Youth and adolescents provide another angle into the long-term challenge. According to the June 2025 NCHS Healthy Stat, about 30% of Americans aged 2.98 ate fast food on a given day between 2021 and 2023. On average, children between 2 and 11 received 8.5% of their daily calories from fast food, while teens aged 12-19 consumed a much higher share at 14.6%. That means adolescence remains a critical period where fast food intake is substantial, but it also highlights that calories from burgers and fries make up only part of the picture. Children also consume significant amounts of packaged snacks, sugary drinks, and heavily processed foods marketed directly to them. The concern is less about one brand and more about an entire food system shaping early habits, which in turn supports higher obesity risks into adulthood. Globally, the problem extends beyond individual diets. Policy readiness across countries remains weak. The World Obesity Atlas 2025 found that 2/3 of nations, 126 out of 194, had either none or only one major obesity-related policy in place. Taxes on sugary drinks, limits on advertising unhealthy foods to children, and incentives for healthier options were absent in much of the world. A parallel measure of public health preparedness found similar gaps. 67 countries reported having only one or fewer indicators of health system readiness to deal with obesity-related illness. This gap between rising prevalence and policy preparedness reflects why global healthcare systems feel stretched. Obesity is not just an individual health issue, it has become a structural one. Without systemic frameworks in place, even well-informed individuals find it difficult to navigate food environments designed to promote overconsumption. The outcome of all this is a set of realities that diverge sharply from the narrative offered 2 decades earlier. McDonald's may have been a useful symbol for illustrating portion excess, but the persistence of obesity across regions and demographics shows that root causes go much deeper. Obesity rises not simply from one kind of meal, but from an environment shaped by energy-dense food supply chains, low physical activity built into everyday life, and limited medical or policy infrastructure to reverse the patterns. Blaming one brand obscures the larger web of calorie sources and lifestyle factors that sustain the epidemic. These findings also illustrate why obesity rates continue to climb even after years of documentaries, headline campaigns, and menu reforms. Interventions that focus narrowly on fast food miss the far larger problem of how environments encourage excess consumption at every turn. Grocery store packaging, targeted marketing to children, sprawling portion sizes, and a culture of sedentary living all reinforce the conditions for weight gain. The statistics from 2025 make clear that the story is multifactorial. Obesity arises from how people live, how they work, how food is produced and sold, and how public policy responds or fails to respond. The crisis is not about one drive-through and one set of golden arches. It is about an entire system that encourages high intake and low activity. And that brings us back to the original cultural flashpoint. The image of Morgan Spurlock eating McDonald at every meal in *super size me was never meant to be a typical case. It was an engineered scenario designed to shock. Looking back with the numbers we now have, the broader reality undercuts his framing. The epidemic he linked to a single menu board has proven to be more complex, more structural, and less reducible to one company. To understand why audiences accepted his framing so readily, it helps to examine how his experiment was constructed in the first place, and why the premise carried built-in flaws that made his results both dramatic and misleading. Why Spurlock's premise was flawed from the start. From the very beginning, the supposed experiment at the center of *super size me carried structural flaws that made it more spectacle than study. The setup invited audiences to believe they were watching a neutral test of fast food's effects, but the design built in extreme conditions that virtually no ordinary customer would replicate. Eating McDonald's for breakfast, lunch, and dinner every day for 30 straight days is not a typical pattern of behavior. Most people who frequent fast food might stop in once or twice during the week, occasionally grabbing a meal on the way to work or late at night, but not 3 times a day without interruption. By anchoring the film to this exaggerated premise, Spurlock guaranteed an outcome that already leaned toward crisis. The rule he added about portion sizes made the distortion even greater. To dramatize the temptation of upselling, Spurlock required himself to always say yes if an employee offered to supersize his meal. That may have sounded like a fair way to show how customers encounter pressure, but it was not an accurate reflection of reality. Surveys at the time indicated that only a minority of customers accepted supersizing when offered, and employees didn't ask on every order. By treating the offer as mandatory, Spurlock engineered excessive calorie increases without leaving open the possibility of restraint. It was not a neutral test of what McDonald's food could do under normal conditions. It was a guarantee that caloric overload would occur every single time. The other major exclusions reinforced this predetermined trajectory. Spurlock cut exercise almost entirely, deciding in advance not to include walks, workouts, or even consistent daily movement that could affect outcomes. For many people, physical activity mitigates the impact of dietary excess, whether through labor-heavy jobs, commuting on foot, or ordinary efforts to burn calories. By avoiding motion, he created conditions where weight gain and fatigue would escalate rapidly. Moderation, too, was missing. Audiences didn't see him substituting water for soda, choosing smaller sandwiches, or occasionally skipping dessert. Every choice leaned toward the most calorie-dense option, loading each meal with multiple layers of sugar, fat, and salt. These were not average consumer behaviors. They were theatrical extremes baked into the structure from day one. The missing food log matters here as well. A credible study requires documentation so that others can check totals, evaluate meal composition, and see how decisions affected outcomes. Spurlock refused to release his detailed diary, meaning the public couldn't confirm whether his daily totals matched what he claimed. It also meant no one could verify if his meals reflected what menus in 2004 actually offered, especially when inconsistent items, like salads or smaller shakes, appeared on-screen. This lack of transparency reinforced suspicion that the experiment was staged to secure a dramatic arc rather than to provide reproducible finding. Replication attempts highlight this point. When Swedish researchers at Linköping University had medical students repeat a fast food-only diet under supervision, the outcomes were far milder. Participants did gain weight and reported loss of energy, but none experienced the sudden liver damage or alarming cholesterol spikes that dominated super size me asterisk. Similarly, critics like Tom Naughton, who produced Fat Head documented their calorie intake and found weight loss or stable markers instead of collapse. Teacher John Cisna demonstrated how portion control and balanced choices at McDonald's could even align with recommended daily calories. Taken together, these examples made clear that Spurlock's routine was not an inevitable outcome of eating fast food. The extreme results depended on his self-imposed rules, not on the restaurant's menu alone. That reveals the deeper contradiction at the heart of the documentary. It presented itself as investigative, yet operated with the logic of performance. A valid nutritional study tests variables openly, tracks results, and allows replication. Spurlock removed moderation, banned exercise, forced extras through the supersize rule, and concealed the data that could have clarified his actual calorie load. In science, such a design would not survive even basic peer review. In film, however, it generated powerful narrative momentum. Audiences saw decline unfold step by step, never realizing the story was built to collapse no matter what. Another overlooked issue is how the experiment placed blame on a single brand while avoiding broader context. By narrowing the focus to McDonald, Spurlock encouraged the interpretation that its food was uniquely destructive, rather than showing what happens when anyone eats thousands more calories than they burn for a month. The truth is that similar outcomes would have arisen from overeating at any calorie-dense chain, pizza, ice cream, or steakhouse buffet. By framing McDonald as the singular villain, the film erased essential nutritional principles in favor of creating a target audiences already distrusted. This didn't clarify the real causes of weight gain. It simplified them into a morality play people were eager to believe. Even the way doctors were shown tied into this theatrical strategy. Their comments, edited to look shocking, stood in for scientific assessment. Elevated cholesterol levels or changes in liver enzymes were presented as catastrophic developments rather than predictable shifts in someone eating well past maintenance calories without exercise. By choosing only the most alarming lines and surrounding them with dark cutaways, Spurlock gave the impression of definitive evidence when in reality the numbers had other possible explanations. It is telling that, without his rules in place, replication attempts failed to reproduce these extraordinary effects, underscoring that drama, not data, was carrying the story. Spurlock's design shows how carefully the arc was staged. He promised to eat only one chain's food to eliminate variety. He made supersizing mandatory to ensure the maximum caloric hit. He eliminated exercise to guarantee visible decline. He withheld his logs so that his totals could not be challenged. By setting these boundaries before the cameras rolled, he constructed a collapse rather than discovered one. Viewers thought they were witnessing a health crisis unfold. In reality, they were watching a scripted sequence where the outcome had been decided long before the first order was placed. Understanding these flaws strips away the illusion that Super Size Me documented anything universal. It did not prove what happens when people eat fast food. It proved what happens when one man engineers his eating habits to secure a crash for the sake of a movie. By borrowing the language of science but avoiding its standards, the film blurred spectacle and research until audiences couldn't tell the difference. The problem isn't that overconsumption has no risks. Those risks are real, but that the film was built to exaggerate them as dramatically as possible. The strength of that exaggeration explains why the documentary resonated so much, but it also explains why its credibility collapsed years later. What was presented as investigation was, in fact, staged decline dressed up as discovery. That makes the flaws in its premise inseparable from the reputation of the man behind it, whose personal choices and public persona were soon to become part of the story themselves. Spurlock himself, fallout and reputation. After the release of Super Size Me in 2004, Morgan Spurlock quickly became one of the most prominent figures in documentary filmmaking. The movie's surprise box office success, paired with its Oscar nomination, set him apart as a filmmaker capable of reaching mainstream audiences with nonfiction storytelling. That visibility opened doors far beyond a single project. Over the next 2 decades, Spurlock directed more than 20 films and produced nearly 70, using his reputation to secure backing for works like Where in the World is Osama bin Laden and Palm Wonderful Presents, the greatest movie ever sold. Each of these projects mixed social commentary with accessible, often humorous storytelling, establishing Spurlock not just as a documentarian, but as a recognizable cultural figure who could carry an issue to wide audiences. This period cemented his public image as a risk-taker willing to put himself inside his experiments. Television ventures extended that persona, offering audiences the same blend of topical focus and dramatic self-involvement that had defined Super Size Me. He was cast in the media as someone both entertaining and critical, a voice capable of piercing consumer culture while still keeping subjects approachable. For investors and studios, this combination made Spurlock appealing. His work reliably produced attention, headlines, and controversy, all of which translated into cultural visibility. But in 2017, during the height of the Me Too movement, that carefully built image collapsed in a matter of days. Spurlock published a personal essay titled I Am Part of the Problem, in which he admitted to past incidents of sexual misconduct, instances of dishonesty, and revealed a decades-long struggle with alcoholism. He wrote that he had been consistently drinking since the age of 13 and had not been sober for more than a week in 30 years. Rather than serving as a preemptive act of transparency, the confession ignited condemnation. It stripped away the credibility he had relied upon since the mid-2000s and left collaborators, supporters, and audiences questioning not just his personal conduct, but also the integrity of his work. The professional consequences followed almost immediately. Partnerships dissolved, companies distanced themselves, and projects already underway lost their momentum. The most notable casualty was Super Size Me 2, Holy Chicken, a planned sequel that had been picked up for distribution by YouTube Red. After Spurlock's confession, YouTube withdrew from the project, leaving the film without a distributor and halting its release schedule. Though the movie would later resurface in a more limited form, the damage to his reputation proved lasting. A filmmaker who had once represented authenticity in documentary activism now struggled to find stable opportunities. The fallout also shifted how Super Size Me itself was interpreted. Medical commentators and researchers had already questioned aspects of the project's design, pointing to missing food logs and implausible claims about short-term health collapse. After Spurlock's 2017 admissions, those criticisms gained new force. His confession of long-term alcohol use, in particular, cast direct doubt on one of the most memorable medical revelations in the original film. That 30 days of fast food had left his liver resembling that of an alcoholic. With the new information in hand, doctors and critics argued that his results could no longer be treated at face value. His private history meant the health outcomes captured in the movie might not reflect food alone, but instead a broader mix of hidden variables. What once divided viewers into camps of believers and skeptics now felt less ambiguous, as Spurlock's own words provided an alternative explanation. Here, the contradiction between the filmmaker and the film itself became striking. Super Size Me was presented as an unvarnished look at the cost of fast food on the body, yet the director was concealing major personal truths that reshaped the meaning of what audiences saw. For teachers, journalists, and advocates who had used clips of the documentary in classrooms or conversations about nutrition, this reversal altered its function. Instead of serving as a straightforward cautionary tale about hamburgers, the film became an example of how personal omissions can distort nonfiction storytelling. Where once it was treated as an educational tool, it now risked being cited as a case study in why transparency is essential when presenting material as reality. The collapse of Spurlock's public credibility occurred at the same time his broader career was winding down. He had once been a visible force, pushing ambitious projects and experimenting with forms of sponsorship and storytelling uncommon in documentary circles. By the close of the 2010s, those opportunities diminished as collaborators hesitated to associate their brands with his name. Unlike some figures who re-emerged after controversy, Spurlock never regained a comparable platform, and his professional trajectory narrowed significantly. The admissions that were meant to position him as honest instead ensured that he was no longer trusted in the very arenas that had once celebrated him. In May 2024, Spurlock died at the age of 53, and the coverage that followed reflected the complexity of his legacy. Headlines acknowledged the cultural importance of Supersize Me, noting how it reshaped conversations about obesity and fast food at a time when the topic was entering the mainstream. But those reflections were balanced with reminders of his own admissions, the misconduct, the alcoholism, and the dishonesty that had undermined his authority years earlier. The obituaries framed a divided story. A filmmaker who reached a rare level of influence for a documentarian, but whose credibility eroded under the weight of his own choices. For many observers, that duality has become the defining reputation Spurlock left behind. His career trajectory mirrored the arc of his most famous work: dramatic attention, widespread influence, and then deep skepticism once missing context came to light. He demonstrated how documentaries could shape perception on a mass scale, but also how personal omissions could cut into that perception later. His downfall, in turn, became a reminder that the credibility of nonfiction stories rests not only on what appears on-screen, but also on the trustworthiness of their creator. Spurlock's story also complicates how audiences now look back on Supersize Me. The film remains an important cultural artifact, part indictment of fast food, part reflection of early 2000s anxieties, but its meaning has shifted. Because Spurlock's personal history reshaped how medical findings should be interpreted, the film's central claims no longer stand as unchallenged fact. What endures is less a scientific case against one company, and more a demonstration of how a compelling narrative, once believed, can outweigh more careful explanations. That ultimately is where the contradictions of his career point. Spurlock gained visibility by packaging bold claims into gripping stories, and for a time, those stories changed public discussion. His admissions, fallouts, and loss of trust demonstrated the limits of that approach. A story built without full disclosure can only hold its power for so long. His career stands as a cautionary example for documentary filmmakers, critics, and audiences alike. As his reputation continues to be reassessed, one theme emerges clearly. Spurlock's life and work show how quickly attention and influence can fade once the reliability of the storyteller is called into question. And that context sets the stage for the broader realization. His most famous film will be remembered less for what it said about food science than for what it revealed about the pull of a strong narrative. In the end, Supersize Me showed less about nutrition than it did about how a dramatic story can capture culture. The calorie math was never verified, replication attempts failed to match his collapse, and Spurlock's hidden history with alcohol added a confounding factor he never disclosed. Taken together, the film's central claim proved unreliable, yet its narrative proved powerful enough to shape how millions thought about fast food. The real lesson is to weigh anecdotes against evidence before treating them as fact. What surprised you most when you learned the full story about Supersize Me? If you'd like more debunk and explain breakdowns, don't forget to like and subscribe.